But you have to really just go out there and be willing to go into something that is not a glamour area, and through your attention to it and bringing technology and expertise to it, maybe it becomes a glamour area at some point. When you think about what we were doing, what our product was doing, our product was simulating the operation of the telephone network, right? So that people who made modems and eventually cell phones, we made probably the most widely used telephone propagation simulator in the world. Every cell phone manufacturer ended up using this. But what we were doing wasn't all that glamorous. Okay.
Hi everybody, we're here with David Tarver, a professor at University of Michigan.
Lecturer.
Well, could you just introduce yourself to the audience real quick?
Yes, I'm William David Tarver. I go by David, and I am a graduate of University of Michigan College of Engineering. I left here couldn't wait to leave here, with a bachelor's and a master's degree in electrical engineering in, I hate to say it, 1976. And so I worked as an engineer at Bell Laboratories, which in those days was that was the place to work. If you were an electrical engineer or interested in telecommunications, it was like this. So I was fortunate to get a job there as a member of technical staff, and then after several years there, I started my own business in the basement of my home in New Jersey, and with a couple of buddies who were co-founders. And we grew that business to a pretty good size, sold it in 1995. I've been doing community service work, and I wrote a book, teaching here at University of Michigan. So just doing things that I choose and enjoy, mostly since then. Yeah.
So today, currently you're the founder and president of the Urban Entrepreneurship Initiative.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the mission that you're trying to accomplish there and sort of why you started?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and people know about Flint these days mostly because of the water crisis, right? But when I was growing up in Flint, Flint had the second highest per capita income in the United States. It was a boom town. It was a General Motors town, and pretty much anybody who wanted a job in those days had a job, right? And the schools were great. We had people coming from all over the country and around the world to see the Flint public schools. We had Flint pioneered the community schools concept, where the school was the hub of the community, a lot of activities tied in with it for the general community. And so that was my understanding of how a community worked and how schools worked. I thought everywhere was like that. So I went to New Jersey to work. I found out that everywhere was not like that, particularly in the community I went to in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. But I had a great time and a great career. When I came back to Michigan in 2007, Michigan was very different from the Michigan that I grew up in. And cities like Flint and Detroit and Pontiac and Saginaw were really down, right? And so I'm here in the university teaching, and I see all of this wealth and all of this intellect and all of this construction, facilities and so forth. And I'm thinking, if we're so smart over here, why do the cities look like that over there? It just didn't seem like there was enough focus or attention being paid on the well-being of people who lived in urban communities. But I felt like we had the resources to deal with that. So I decided to focus my attention on improving urban communities through entrepreneurship, engineering, technology. And so I started this organization, Urban Entrepreneurship Initiative, in 2014. And in 2015, I started this course in the Center for Entrepreneurship, the Urban Entrepreneurship Practicum. And the whole idea is just to get people to think about the opportunities that are there for improving the quality of life in urban communities. And we've certainly seen lots of businesses take advantage of those opportunities. Probably one of the biggest ones is like Uber, Airbnb, these kinds of things. When people think about improving urban communities, they often think about small, social, they call social entrepreneurship or social impact organizations. But there are organizations across the board that can be brought to bear on improving the quality of life in urban communities. So that's what I want to focus on. That's what I would like to focus entrepreneurs out there on, and I'd also like to get students involved. And one of the things that I've noticed, I've come upon and after teaching this course for some years, is that the same principles that apply to what I call urban entrepreneurship apply to entrepreneurship in general, because I feel like you should always do community discovery. You should always, and whether that community is a geographic community or an industrial community or a financial community, right? You need to understand the community and understand what the biggest needs in that community are. And so the methodologies that we employ in this urban entrepreneurship practicum are applicable to any kind of business, right? But I want people to especially focus on urban communities and to bring to bear their expertise and technology on those kinds of issues.
So you mentioned that Detroit and Michigan as a whole, when you left and then came back, wasn't the same Detroit.
Right.
What do you think contributed to the decay in Detroit's urban entrepreneurship and really economic core?
Yeah.
And what do you think will bring it back?
Yeah. Again, that's another good question. So I would say if you ask people in general what caused the decline, they would talk about globalization, right? Because the automobile industry was here, and at some point we found that these companies found that they could manufacture in a lot of different places, right? And so that would be one thing that was cited, and I think globalization played a role. But I grew up, again, in this town when these things were happening, right? Mm-hmm. And what we experienced in places like Flint and Detroit was a social separation that preceded globalization, mm-hmm. right? So in 1965, in this country, we passed something at the national level called the Voting Rights Act. And in 1964, there was the Civil Rights Act that was passed. We had a segregated country before then, right? There was a social segregation that was legally, if not enshrined, tolerated. Mm-hmm. And so when that changed in the mid-'60s, I was a student in Flint, Michigan, and I remember sleeping on the City Hall lawn in Flint, Michigan, as part of a movement for open housing, right? Because this was 1967, before 1967 in Flint, there were certain neighborhoods that only certain people could live in, and other neighborhoods other people could live in. Well, due to the Civil Rights Act being passed and the Voting Rights Act being passed, a lot of people felt like this should change, right? So I was in the sleep-in, again, on the City Hall lawn. We passed in Flint, Michigan, the first what's called open housing ordinance that was passed by popular referendum in the United States, the first one in the country. And after that time, so we saw this as a huge victory, right? Mm-hmm. That things were going to change. Flint had its first black mayor at that time, right? Immediately after that, there was a lot of separation. A lot of white folks left the city of Flint, moved to the suburbs. And years later, some of the companies moved, right? So there was this failure to live together as different people, right? People from different backgrounds. And then, it's a lot more complicated now. In those days, it was mainly black and white, right? And so white folks took, their wealth and expertise and left the city, left it, majority black and a lot less affluent than it had been. And the similar thing happened in Detroit. There were huge battles in Detroit. There were attempts to integrate the schools in Detroit, and a lot of people left. So I think that this was a precursor to a lot of the economic decline in these cities. And I think that globalization was seen by some of the companies as a means to deal with that separation, because now, we don't have to manufacture, we don't have to employ these people here. We can export, we can outsource this manufacturing and so forth. So again, I think that was a lot of the genesis of the separation, of the decline. There was a social component to it, and there was also an economic component to it, and part of that economic component was globalization. In terms of where things stand now, I think people are a lot wiser now than they were in those days, but a lot of the damage has been done. So, it used to be that if a black person moved into a certain neighborhood, the white folks who were there would leave, right?
White flight.
That doesn't happen, as much these days. And now we have a much more multicultural society at all levels, right? We didn't see the participation of Asian folks in the society and in industry and in the culture to the extent that we do now, or folks from Latin America, from a lot of different places. So we have a lot more multicultural society today, but we're still seeing a lot of tension, a lot of conflict, between groups, and I think that that's one of the things that in urban communities tend to be places, and have always been places, where you have people from different backgrounds coming together. Mm-hmm. And there's always tends to be some conflict, about that, that's attendant to that kind of coming together. But then you come out of that with a richer, more productive society if you can manage that. And so that's another reason why I think it's so important to pay attention to how well cities are working, because those cities are the economic engines of the country, of the world, right? And I would say, as of today, something like more than 55% of people in the world live in an urban community. We're definitely an urban world now. So I think it's important to address these issues and to be effective at doing that.
So you did a fantastic job of laying out the economic and social situation in Detroit and really in the country post the civil rights movement. In that sort of world that you just laid out, what was it like starting Telecom, leaving Bell Laboratories?
Yeah.
And could you tell us the story of your personal story in that broader narrative of civil rights and
I don't want to get too long-winded about it. I could talk about this for days, right? Mm-hmm. But again, growing up in Flint, my father worked for the U.S. Postal Service. He was a mailman at first, and he had served in the Army during World War II, and he learned radio and electronics while he was in the Army. He was in the Signal Corps in the Army. He was stationed out in the Aleutian Islands, right? And he was a radio operator. So when he came back, he wanted to continue that work, but there weren't opportunities for black men in those days, and there certainly weren't many opportunities for black men in those days to do that kind of work. So he ended up working for the post office. But he still had that interest, and so he built an electronics workshop in our basement, in the basement of our home, and that's where I learned electronics. And he brought all kinds of books home, and this was in the 1950s, 1960s. He brought home books about transistors and lasers and all kinds of things like that, and so that rubbed off on me, and that's what got me into the field of electronics. So when I was coming through school, again, we lived in a much more segregated society then, so I didn't even know if it was possible for me to start a business. From those early days, somehow in those early days, I figured that I wanted to have my own electronics company. And so I figured my mission in life was to see if this was possible, and in fact, to prove that it was possible. And so when I came here to Michigan, I used to tell my friends here, when I leave here, I'm going to start an electronics company, and I'm gonna make millions, and when I'm 40 years old, I'm gonna sell it, and I'm just gonna, live the rest of my life. I'm gonna travel the world. I used to tell my buddies this, right? And they would look at me like, okay, Dave. But one of the reasons that I was so intent, and one of the things that motivated me, was that I wanted to see if this was possible. So I looked at starting this business as an experiment. And my hypothesis was, it's possible. I have the same education other folks have. My co-founders have similar education. One of my buddies was a graduate of Morehouse, Georgia Tech, Stanford University, master's degree. The other guy went to University of South Carolina, top of his class, Rutgers University, master's. I'm University of Michigan. I feel like, we have just as much preparation as anybody else. It should be possible for us to do this. And so that was one of the things that motivated us. We wanted to prove that we could generate this value in life and capture this value, right? And that's why I call the book Proving Ground, because we saw this effort as an attempt to prove our worth, quite frankly. Because even back in those days, when we went to work at Bell Labs, we had a pretty advanced, pretty progressive management at AT&T Bell Labs, and we had something called affirmative action, right, which was an attempt to bring people into the company who had not been there before. And this was, again, it wasn't just blacks, it was Asians, it was women, but there was a lot of backlash against that. There were people that felt like, I'm an engineer, I'm working there, I'm producing, good work, but there were people who felt like, I'm only there because of affirmative action, right? And so that was, again, one of the things that motivated us to, okay, if you feel that way, we're going to leave and we're going to start this company and we'll see how much we're worth. And if you're right, maybe we'll be back looking for a job. If we're right, we won't. And so that's kind of the backdrop against that. And so I didn't realize I still had my headset on. So we had a lot of experiences in going through starting this business in the basement, financing the business. We had no outside financing. We got a loan from a bank which was secured to my house, secured to my car, all this kind of thing. But all of these experiences we looked at as, hey, this is why it's been so difficult for people to do this in the past. And I wrote the book. I said this was an experiment. The book is my report on what happened, right? Mm-hmm. And so, again, there was so much that I learned in the course of going through this business journey, and I'm glad I did it, but it's not something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I had told my friends when I was 40 I was going to sell the business. The day that we closed the sale, I was 42. So I felt as though I was 2 years late, but it was still, gratifying.
Mm-hmm. So could you tell us a bit more about why? I understand it was to prove, but the problem of the business that you were solving with the technical electronics and solutions?
Yeah, so again, I would say, we were motivated by this desire to prove what we could do, but we love electronics and engineering, and so it was also something that we viewed as fun, right? And nowadays, and even then, a lot of people, when they get a day off or it's a holiday or something, they go somewhere or have some fun. Fun for me was digging into some new engineering work or finding some new chip that I needed to understand, how to make it work, or that was fun. And so that was also a huge motivation for us. But I forgot the second part of your question.
The problem?
Yes. So what we were doing. So when I was a student here at Michigan, and I went to General Motors Institute in Flint for 2 years. It's called Kettering now. And when I was there, I walked into the gym one night, and there was a electronic music concert going on. It was using something called a Moog synthesizer. Robert Moog was one of the early electronic music pioneers. And I just happened to walk into the gym when this concert was going on, and I was absolutely fascinated. And so I did a little reading on it, and I played the trombone in high school. I was the drum major of the band and all this stuff. So I was interested in music. I'm a singer. So I said, you know what, I think this electronic music thing is something that I could do, and it could be a business. And in those days, everything was analog, and things were becoming digital. So I said, you know what, I'm going to make a digital electronic music synthesizer. And so when I came here as a student, that's what I was working on. From my start as a junior, I had a lab in my bedroom and oscilloscope and all kinds of instruments. And my graduate project was a digital electronic music synthesizer. And I pretty much finished it before leaving here, but it wasn't a product yet. So when I got to Bell Labs, I continued to work on this thing in the evening and on the weekend. And I thought that I was going to start this business making digital electronic music synthesizers and sell them to my favorite musician then and now is Stevie Wonder. As I'm going to sell this stuff to Stevie Wonder. I'm going to live in LA. I'm going to make synthesizers. But I did something that a lot of my students do, and I think a lot of engineers do. I felt like I knew everything, right? And I felt like I knew what this thing needed to be. I didn't talk to a single musician. I was just reading up on things and coming up with designs and so forth. And when I finished this thing, years later, this was, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years after I started working on it, I finally showed it to some musicians, and they told me all the reasons why it wouldn't work for them, right? It's not that it didn't work technically, but it just didn't fit their needs, right? I should have started out doing some, customer discovery, right? I didn't know about customer discovery back then. So that was a big disappointment. But while I was working at Bell Labs, Bell Labs was developing lots of communications gear, modems, eventually cell phones, this sort of thing. That so much of the communication technology that we use today was developed at Bell Labs. So anyway, in those days, people used analog modems to transmit data over the telephone network. That's how you sent data from one place to another. That's how a banking terminal would access the main computer. That's how department stores would send their, data from one place to another. There were these modems, and they sent the information. They would modulate the information to go over this analog telephone line. On the other end would demodulate, make it digital again. And that communications channel was prone to error, right? There was noise, there was nonlinearities, there was all kinds of interference. And so I realized that, and by the way, my first project at Bell Labs was designing computer-based systems for measuring those anomalies that would occur on a telephone link so that service people could be deployed to the right place to fix whatever situation occurred. So in that work, I was using this box. It was called a Bradley box, but it was this instrument to simulate the kinds of things that could happen, to simulate noise, to simulate intermodulation, to simulate phase jitter, and all these kinds of things. And this box was analog, and it was, looked like a big lunch pail, had knobs and switches on it. And I said, you know what, this is kind of like a synthesizer because it's doing the same things that a synthesizer would do. You got vibrato, that's, amplitude jitter, tremolo, phase jitter, this kind of thing. Noise, simulators generate noise, pink noise, white noise, all this kind of thing. So I said, you know what, I can make a digital version of this thing, right? And instead of selling it to musicians, I'm selling it to communications companies. And by the way, the synthesizers in those days, one of the reasons these guys didn't particularly like what I did was that my synthesizer would have cost a few $1,000s. They wanted to pay, less than $1,000 for something. Well, communications companies had lots of money. And so this little lunch pail box that I was using cost $6,000 a piece, right? So we developed this, me and my buddies developed this device. And by the way, that was another thing that I learned. Don't work alone. And also talk to people who might use this thing, right? And figure out if it's doing what it needs to do. And so, I corrected some of those errors that I had made before. And so I had been promoted out of the group that I started, and my two buddies were still working in that group. And so one day I invited them to lunch. I was very nervous because I wanted to invite them to work with me on this project. And they didn't know that, I was doing this, and I didn't know how they would react. So we're walking to lunch, and I didn't know how to open the issue or anything, but at one point I just blurted out, I said, I've got this idea, I think we'll all be millionaires if we do this thing. And I didn't know, we'd be millionaires or not, but I just felt that was a good thing to say. And so I went over with them and they said, yeah, we'll come and work on this with you. Well, I wasn't asking them to leave the company. I wasn't ready to leave the company at that point. I was asking them to come in the basement and nights and weekends and help me develop this prototype. And so we spent 2 years from that lunch. We spent 2 years developing this prototype. And finally, when it was ready, I left Bell Labs. I was a manager by this time. People literally thought I was crazy because nobody left Bell Labs in those days, and especially to go and work in their basement, right? And so people wondered did he have a nervous breakdown, or, is there something wrong with this guy? But I left, and a few months later, my co-founder Steve left. He had just gotten married, right? That previous summer, so people really thought he was crazy. Maybe including his new wife, because again, he's going from a very secure position, a member of technical staff at the premier research and development institution in the country, to go and work in Dave's basement, right? And then a few months later, we shipped our first product a couple months after Steve joined. But that next summer, Charles got promoted to management, and he had just gotten married. And so a few months later, Charles left the company and came and joined in the basement. And so, as I say, people thought we were really weird, really disturbed or something. But again, I think the thing that there was just this very strong desire to prove what we could do and to prove what we were worth. We didn't know if this thing was going to fly or not. Or we certainly didn't. Selling a company for $30 million and, not having to work again and, this kind of thing. We just wanted to see if we could do it. And so I guess in that sense, maybe we were a little crazy. But that's how strong this motivation was and this desire to prove what we could do.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to be crazy and weird in order to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you also mentioned that decades ago, when people who went to universities and colleges, they can get a job if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of opportunities to create new business ideas because not so many things have existed at that time. But things have changed so much right now. Like, it's so competitive to start a business. Hundreds of people are competing over one business idea.
Yeah.
So I just want to hear about your views on like what have changed over years, and what are some of the problems you have met when you were doing your business, and how people could better react to this now.
Well, what you say is interesting, because I think from my viewpoint, there's more opportunity now than there was, in terms of for entrepreneurs. There's more opportunity now than there was then. But I think in any case, you have to really see where the opportunity is and see where the needs are, right? And that's one of the things that I talk to people about in terms of urban entrepreneurship, right? There are lots of problems out there. If you think about housing, you think about education, health, mobility, all these kinds of things. There are needs, real needs out there. But what tends to happen is this herd effect, right? Where people go into something, right? You see that someone has created a chat bot, so okay, I'm going to do a chat bot. Well, yeah, there's going to be a lot of competition there, right? And I think what you have to do, one of the people who's made the most money, or made certainly a tremendous amount of money over the past umpteen years, is this guy, Wayne Huizinga, right? I think he died a few years back. But what did he do? He started a waste company, waste collection company, right? Waste management, right? And bringing supply chain expertise and management expertise and digital expertise, to something that looks not glamorous, right? And now waste management dominates, waste collection right across the country. At least I think they do. They did at one point. And then he buys Blockbuster Video, and he gets into more glamorous things, right? But I think that people don't see past the glamour level, very easily. But you have to really just go out there and be willing to go into something that is not a glamour area, and through your attention to it and bringing technology and expertise to it, maybe it becomes a glamour area at some point. When you think about what we were doing, what our product was doing, our product was simulating the operation of the telephone network, right? So that people who made modems and eventually cell phones, we made probably the most widely used telephone propagation simulator in the world. Every cell phone manufacturer ended up using this. But what we were doing wasn't all that glamorous. We're simulating the way the telephone network worked. We weren't making the cell phones, right? And so many people who might go into this area with a certain expertise would think, hey, I'm going to make a cell phone. I can make a cell phone too, right? And that's where all the competition is. And so if you're fortunate enough to be successful in that, yeah, you can make a lot of money, but it's tough, right? And so I like to encourage people, especially young people, to focus on an area where maybe it's not so glamorous, but where the real need is, and to bring that expertise, to that area. And it doesn't have to be, in terms of urban, community quality of life, although, again, I think that there are lots of opportunities there. But I think there are lots of areas where you can bring that expertise, where the trick is, it's like in investing, right? You buy low, sell high, right? A lot of people see what's successful today, right? Oh, I'm going to buy some NVIDIA stock today, right? Well, maybe you should have bought some NVIDIA stock, 5 years ago. But it's the same thing in entrepreneurship. People see the shiny object, they see, the glamorous area. Oh, and they say, oh, I can't start a business in that area now because there's a lot of people involved in that area. Well, look at a different area, right, where there's not so much attention. So I think that's the key. And I know that was a long-winded response, but I'm kind of passionate about that.
No, that was a great response. So look where people aren't looking.
That's right.
And where today are you looking?
I'm looking at taking a nap most days. No. Actually, so this Urban Entrepreneurship Initiative, it's a not-for-profit venture organization. So I am not, I started this organization 10 years ago, and it's not something that I've ever, I'm not an employee. I'm a board member. I've never taken a salary or anything. I'm doing this just because it's something that I want to do. But we're taking a step now. So when we started the organization, it was mainly about advocacy. We wanted people to pay more attention to these kinds of opportunities, and we held like a symposium in Ann Arbor and Detroit and in Flint and tried to get people together to look at what communities could do, what individuals could do, what universities could do. We had all kinds of things going on, right? But it was all about advocacy. Now, what we're focusing on is more action oriented. And so we're moving the organization to be member based, right? And so we're thinking about the issue. We want there to be more entrepreneurs out there who are focused on improving the quality of life in urban communities, and not just startups, but people who are in businesses already, even large businesses, government organizations. But there's still that need for entrepreneurial innovation to change the situation regardless of what kind of company you're coming from. So what we're doing is putting a platform in place that will support a member organization and bring certain resources to the table. So, for example, building profiles of a lot of urban-focused businesses that were out there, because people don't know what do these urban-focused businesses look like. What are some successful urban-focused businesses? So if I'm an entrepreneur and I think, you know what, yeah, I think I would like to do something in an urban community. Maybe I'd like to do something in education. So if there's a place I could go and I could flip through, okay, here's some education businesses that have started like in the last few years in this area, and here's what they experienced, and here's what their business model looks like, here's how they financed it, here's their marketing strategy, this kind of thing. I think it'll give people more of a feeling of assurance that, you know, where they fit in and how they might do work in that area. So we're building this library of business profiles, and I have a couple of students here, research assistants, who are working on defining those profiles. And then we also want to profile communities. So where do the opportunities exist in different communities, in these different, what we call community vitality categories? Where's the biggest opportunity in terms of a locality to do something in education, right? And what are the factors that you would use to calculate that? So I have another research assistant working on that, because the idea is, okay, I'm an entrepreneur, I want to do something great using my expertise. Maybe my expertise is, you know, computer science, maybe it's electrical engineering, whatever, robotics, I don't know, but I want to do something. What are the opportunities, say, in Flint, Michigan, for somebody that has that set of expertise? And so to be able to do some matchmaking between people who have skills and the communities that need people with those skills. And then there's the whole issue of technology, which is a huge thing now, right? Because we have all of these, we have a lot of new technologies that we can bring to bear on solving problems. And they can be technologies that you use to implement a product, or they can be technologies that you use to implement a business, right? So we want to also provide kind of like I don't know the term I'm looking for, but a technology library. So if an entrepreneur is looking at starting a business in a certain area, in a certain category, they can say, well, what do people who are doing businesses in this category use for CRM, right? What do they use for, what technology tools do they use in different areas of operating the business? Or what technologies, whether they're proprietary or not, might be out there that would help me implement this business? That's something a little tougher. That's something we're just getting started on, but I think with the rapid acceleration of technology, we need to be aware. I mean, the shining object right now, probably justifiably so, is AI, right? So if you're thinking about, I'm going to start a business in education, okay, how can I apply AI to this particular thing? AI is just, a few years ago, it was social media, right? Every time I'd ask students, how can we improve this business? Oh, social media. Well, you know, what are you talking about? What do we got to do in social media? So anyway, technology, being able to utilize technology to make a game-changing contribution, I think that's something that we want people to be good at. And so that's another area. So this Urban Entrepreneurship Initiative, we're changing it from what it was to what it will be. And that's what consumes most of my time right now, that and teaching the class. But they're very related, so it's not like I'm going in different directions.
Glad that you just mentioned AI. It's definitely one of the most glamorous areas right now. So wonder, what do you think the future of the entrepreneurship will look like with AI?
Yeah, it's tough. The short answer is I don't know. You know, I encountered this talk about AI some years ago, right? And this fellow Ray Kurzweil wrote this book called The Singularity is Near. I think he published this book in like 2004, and he predicted that somewhere around 2030 was going to be the point at which the computer intelligence exceeded the human intelligence, and I would get I used to think about that a lot and get nervous about it. And so around 2014, I was teaching this class in engineering school, the entrepreneurship class for in industrial engineering, it's IOE 422, which happens to be a course that Larry Page took when he was a student here. But at any rate, I'm teaching this course, and I decided at the end of the course, last session, we're going to talk about the singularity and, Ray Kurzweil's theories and stuff. And the students got so depressed, right? It's not something that I probably should have been talking about in the last class session and maybe developed it a little more, this kind of thing, because I could see people feeling like, why am I here? Why am I studying engineering, this kind of thing? But, this stuff is progressing so rapidly. I bought a Tesla back in 2014, right? And I think I had the first Tesla, certainly in my neighborhood and probably in the whole town, right? And the month after I bought this thing, Elon Musk was saying, yeah, it's going to be like robo-taxis in a year or so. And people asked me, did you buy this autopilot option? I said, hell no, I'm going to buy autopilot 1.0? No, I don't think so. I said, maybe 10.0, right? And so, oddly enough, I've had, this is my fourth Tesla I'm driving since then. And oddly enough, they just introduced this version 12.3. Last week, version 12.3 took me from Main Street in Ann Arbor to the curb in front of my house without me doing anything. And when I was arriving here for the interview, I mentioned I found a parking spot out front. And so it was a tight spot. And so I'm backing into the spot and I had to pull back out again. I said, wait a minute, this thing does the parking. So I touched the screen where it had the little parking space. This thing parked the damn car in one shot. Wow. And so, you can see if this is where things are in 2024. And I used to say to people, I don't think that this full self-driving is going to work, anytime soon, because the capability of AI that takes, when AI is at that point, there are implications for so many other things in society as well, right? And so I said, I think, maybe 5 years, 10 years. But the thing is, I do feel like we're moving toward that. If it's not the singularity, it's something. And we can't predict reliably what's on the other side of that, right? That's the whole idea of the singularity, right? That it's an event horizon, and we don't know what's on the other side of that. And so, yeah, I'm as confused as anybody else about that. I don't have any answers. My only thing is we have more and more tools at our disposal today. Life is, if you're in a certain class, life is so much more convenient than it was, 10 or 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And things are just, on one level are getting better and better. And so why not use these tools while we have them to make life better for as many people as possible, right? And when that event horizon comes and, if it comes and we're in a different kind of relationship to technology, hopefully the fact that we try to make things better for as many people as possible will count for something when we're on that. But the technology is just accelerating at a crazy clip. When I was a student here, when I was leaving as a student here, and by the way, when I worked at AC Sparkplug in Flint, Michigan as a GMI student, I was working in their advanced development department. And these guys came from Intel trying to sell us the very first microcomputer, right? So I got a chance to work with that first microcomputer. I think it was an Intel 4004, and there was a 256 byte read-only memory device, 256 bytes, and we thought, wow, this is crazy, this is cool. 1972, that's when that was, right? And so when I was coming out of school, I knew a few things. I knew that there's going to be eventually a microcomputer in everything. Everything will be digitized at some point, right? And so I said, I can base my career on this, right? So the things we did, we were taking advantage of digital signal processing and computer technology. This first box that we made for simulating telephone network had 9 microcomputers in it, right? It was the first time anybody, instrumentation company, had done anything like this. And so we built our career on that set of technologies. If I'm coming out of school today, I could ask you, I think that, these intelligent agents are a thing, and they're going to be an even bigger thing. So if you think in terms of computing technology, AI modification, someone last week just implanted a pig kidney, genetically modified pig kidney in a human. So in a way, I'm glad I'm not coming out of school right now. But again, I would do better to ask you, or certainly there are a lot of other people around here who have thoughts about such things. But where do you think things are headed these days? What are you setting yourself up for in terms of where do you think you can make the greatest contribution going forward?
I heard from someone, Mark Andreessen.
Mm-hmm.
He said that there's going to be verticals of specialized verticals of artificial intelligence. So depending on the profession. Mm-hmm. So there'll be a doctor, there'll be an AI accountant.
These are agents I'm talking about. Yeah.
Lawyer, and it'll be subcategorized based on the profession that you're in, and then what I heard is the opportunity lies in finding an obscure profession that is automatable through artificial intelligence that not everyone's looking at right now. Kind of what you said. With everybody's looking at lawyer, doctor, accountant.
Yeah.
And you just need to find the specific vertical that's not so obvious.
So what I'm going to do is develop the intelligent agent that finds verticals.
That would be useful.
And then have them develop the verticals. I mean, that's how fast things are changing,
But yeah, there were so many great things about what you just said, and lots of insightful impacts. But just to close up on a fun one, there's talks about your book, Proving Ground, being turned into a film or documentary. Yeah. Is there a specific scene or favorite scene that you have, maybe, in your story that you'd like to definitely be included in that film?
Yeah, there are a lot of scenes that, because there were a lot of really dramatic, but one of the scenes that, keeps reverberating in my head is actually something that's, it's not totally factual, but it's based on fact. So it's, explaining to someone I'm dating about what this thing is that we're doing, right? And how simulating a telephone network connection or a wireless connection is similar to if someone is able to simulate us sitting in that bar and simulate the conditions of people around us and the other people who are there and the music and the this and the that, and to have that occur while that discussion is going on, right? So that's one of the things. But there were so many dramatic moments. As I say, we had a moment in this company where we had 18 employees at one point. I think we were maybe 2 years in, 18 employees. And one day I walk in and there are 6 letters of resignation on my chair. 6 of the 18 people quit in one day. But there were just thing after thing like that, right? And as I say, we learned so much from those kinds of things that happen. So I'm hoping that, I was working with a director and a producer on developing this documentary, and but it's expensive to do, and it's something that they're looking to raise the funds for doing this thing. I'm not so vain that I'm going to do it myself. I feel like if people want to hear the story, if it is a story, and I think it's really worth telling because it's the first time anything like this happened. And I don't know of a lot of cases even now where, people have developed a company like this independently, going in the basement, this kind of thing. So I think it's a story that needs to be told, and we'll see where it goes. But I could probably think of 10 scenes between now and the time I get to the car that would be compelling.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, wait to see it on TV later.
All right, Nora. Well, again, I'm really looking forward to your review of Proving Ground,
Absolutely.
the book, and you can tell me what scene resonates with you in there.
Yeah. I think that leads to the end of this episode. Thank you so much, David, for being here today.
Thanks
really
for having me.
talking to
It was fun.